Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts. Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you. Would you affirm by repeating after me, something amazing is happening, in my life. Something wonderful is happening, in my church. Now turn and look at someone and say, you're amazing. Look at someone else and say, you're wonderful. All right, good job. You guys are good. You follow directions well. So, there is a craft to writing a sermon and delivering a sermon, and sometimes I follow no procedures, but I have learned that my friend Jerry Roberts, many of you know him, also got his start right here in this ministry. He's the minister at Unity in the Woodlands, and he was seminary trained by the Methodists, and he said they taught him 25 minutes, a joke, 3 points, and a poem. So I'm giving you all of those today. So we're going to begin with a little joke. This actually came from a minister's wife. She said, when my husband, James Rolls, was in seminary, he was invited to preach at a small rural church. And Rolls is spelled R-O-W-L-E-S. It's important for the punchline. However, the man who was in to introduce him had trouble pronouncing his name. So James offered this verbal clue. Remember rolls, like hot buttered rolls. And it worked. So when it came time for the introduction, the man, although somewhat nervously, he said, we are pleased to have with us today the Reverend James Biscuits. I love that. There's another version of that joke, but I can't tell it in church, so I'm not going to. We're all human, we're all imperfect. And when we are human and imperfect, it requires something called forgiveness. All of us are in need of forgiveness, and all of us need to forgive. That's just the way of it. You know, our wonderful Unity teacher and longtime minister, Reverend Edwina Gaines, she has a simple test to determine whether or not you have forgiveness work to do. Goes like this. If you want to know if you need to do some work on forgiveness, are you breathing? And if you answer yes, you have work to do. Amen, that's right. Lyle Trompler is one of our members, and he often supplies me with jokes. That was not his joke today, the biscuit guy. But he last week, he handed me a stack of sheets that he had made. It was copies of hand-lettered signs, different ones that had different sayings on them. And I don't think he knew that I was going to be speaking on forgiveness today, but this one I thought was just beautiful. It was one of those that he handed me. It said, forgiveness does not change the past, but it can enlarge the future. This is part 3 of our 5-part series on removing the obstacles that the vision may be revealed. A vision is about the future. It's about stepping into a larger experience of your own life with greater freedom, fulfillment, purpose, power, joy, love, abundance. Who wants some of that? All right, so you're in the right church this morning. So that's what we're talking about. And this is for you. It's already given. It's already calling. It's already got your name on it. It's wrapped up in a nice bow. It's just waiting. This vision of your expanded life is already here in consciousness. But to step into it in a lived reality, we have to get past some things usually. Most of us, because we're human, we have some old beliefs that we were given. We talked about this last week. And the first part of this series, I talked about how we find that compelling vision. And it's not something we accomplish or check off a list. It's more of a sense of feeling and something that wants to happen through us. It's something we are, not something we do. And last week we talked about how to remove the obstacles in our belief system by using unity principles and practices called denial and affirmation. And this week we're talking about forgiveness. While last week, is a very specific unity teaching, forgiveness is universal. Every spiritual tradition teaches forgiveness. Many non-spiritual traditions, anyone that's about human empowerment talks about forgiveness. It just is. We have to do this work. Your therapist will tell you, your 12-step group will tell you, sometimes your boss will tell you, but you've got work to do. You have to do something to move into a greater experience of your life, and it is about forgiveness. I have heard, I'm going to guess, about 345 sermons on forgiveness in my life in 51 years. And every time I hear something new, I file something away as a little nugget in my forgiveness file, and I could easily stand here and give you a 4.5-hour sermon. Is that okay? All right. The Texans start in 15 minutes. We're going to miss the beginning anyway. I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to trust that somehow out of all of this information and practice that I have tried and tested, something useful will come to you in the next few minutes. I'm going to start the clock now. As I was walking yesterday, when I'm working on a sermon, I get the title and the theme weeks in advance, and I'll just kind of play with ideas. Things will occur to me intuitively. I'll write them down, and I'll get a list of things I want that feel like they may or may not come into the sermon. Yesterday, the list was way too long, and I knew I needed somehow to give it some construction, give it some structure so that I could deliver it in a 20, 25-minute span. And as I was walking around Herman Park yesterday morning, this scripture, which is one of my absolute favorites from the Hebrew Bible, came to me from the prophet Micah, chapter 6, verse 8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. That's from the New International Version. I don't usually use the King James Version, but something about the poetry in certain verses really does move me. It's so Shakespearean. So this is the King James Version. This is what I grew up learning. He hath shown thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. And as that verse kind of swirled in my awareness, something kind of leapt out at which I've never seen before, that this actually describes an evolutionary path which applies to how we show up with other people and will give us some guidance, I believe, on forgiveness. So this is just Michael's interpretation, but I hope today that there will be something that may benefit you in your walk and your forgiveness. As I said, all of us have work to do on this. There's always someone that we need to forgive, and there's always something we need forgiveness for because we are human. We are perfect, eternal, deathless, birthless expressions of God's own nature, and yet we have elected somehow to enter into this experience where we do have a birthday and we do have a death day, and we breathe a lot in between, and we do some amazing things, and we do some interesting things. And so we require forgiveness. But I think there's a code here in Micah 6:8 about how we reveal God on earth and in humanity. So let's begin with the first statement. If we're going to look at what God needs of us, that's what the verse says. He has shown you what he needs, what he requires. The first is to do justly. Why do we need justice? Let me give you a little historical context. Judaism is a religion that is based upon spiritual law, upon traditional law. Before Hammurabi's code, which is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which influenced many of the religions in that part of the world in their conception and their genesis, it was a lawless world that those with the power, with the strength, with the ability, that's what that was, the law. Might was right. And so somewhere in Deuteronomy, there's a Bible verse that says that if your son is acting up, you take him to the council of elders, and then you tell him what's going on, and then if they agree, you can go stone him to death. That's in the Bible. To us, that sounds barbaric, although some of you with teenagers, the thought might be there, but no. It sounds barbaric and cruel and unthinkable and wrong. But in its time, this was civil rights legislation. Because before this law was set down and agreed upon by the Jewish people, the ancient people, the Hebrews, your kids were your property, and you could do whatever you want. And your wives. This is how it worked. And so something happened. There was a cry, there was a need that occurred for justice, for fairness, for equal treatment. And so somewhere in that culture and in others, laws and rules of behavior began to be formed. And these laws and rules, like individual people that made them, are imperfect. But there is something forward moving in that idea. So when the Bible tells us, when Micah 6:8 says, God requires us to do justly, it's talking about how we show up in the public world, how we show up with each other, what agreements do we make to treat each other fairly. And it's important. Martin Luther King says, justice is love correcting that which revolts against love. Dr. Cornel West says, never forget, justice is what love looks like in public. And we are still working it out. In the 21st century, in the United States of America, we are still taking up these conversations and these questions, these difficult things around what does it mean to be in a just society and to live with each other and to have laws that treat each other, that make people act right. That's what we're called to do. And it's important work. And we need to know that when those laws are not met, there is a consequence, and this is how we live in the public sphere. As I mentioned at the beginning of the service, yesterday was Yom Kippur, which is the Jewish Day of Atonement. It is the most holy day. In the ancient peoples, there would be a sacrifice made in the temple to atone for sin. Because what the Day of Atonement really is about is like getting right. We are human, we are imperfect, we fall short, we got to do something to get back into right behavior. Well, as that tradition has grown and evolved, there's no longer sacrifice, but the day has become a day of reflection, introspection, and self-evaluation of where have my actions and my thoughts in this past year veered from who I truly am. It's a beautiful, beautiful day, a holy day of looking within. That work is important for us to see, to ask ourselves, where am I showing up according to what is right? And so this idea that we are called to act justly is important. But what I've found as I've been studying this, it becomes clear that justice is not enough. So what's the next phase of that beautiful verse? We are called to do justly and to love mercy. Have you ever heard this phrase, are you following the letter of the law or the spirit of the law? It's been around for a while because you can follow the letter of the law and still not be in a good place with it. You can be, people that they'll just follow, they'll just kind of skin by and do just exactly what it says I have to do, but there's no spirit there of the righteousness that it was called for. And Jesus spoke about this in his Sermon on the Mount, which scholars believe is the greatest encapsulation of what this historic rabbi actually taught in the Middle East over 2,000 years ago. And Jesus said, "You've heard it said that it was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." This is in Matthew chapter 5, verse 38. "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. And if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, give them your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. And give to the one who asked you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. This is a difficult teaching. What Jesus is saying is that the law is not enough. Following the letter of the law so you don't get in trouble and you can see how good I am, I'm following all the rules. Jesus is saying it's not enough. Something is asking you to go further. As Dr. Cornel West said, justice is how love shows up in public. And what mercy and compassion is how love shows up from a personal way. How we as individuals can give more than just what the law is asking for, but to give from our hearts, to extend, to be available, to open, to allow love to come through us, even when they don't deserve it. And you can start your list in your mind right now. It's a hard teaching. Because sometimes we just think I'll do what's required, I'll be fair. And that should be enough. But what the master teacher is showing us is there is more required of you. You are called into a deeper experience of love on earth. And it requires mercy. It requires compassion, that you go above and beyond what you think people think you ought to do. And you truly become an emissary of love. He has shown thee what is good and what the Lord requires of thee, but to do justly and to love mercy. And point 3, in case you're counting, is to walk humbly with thy God. When we're extending, when we're evolving, when we are becoming more of who and what we truly are, which is love in form. We are expressions of God's own nature, which is love. When we are on this spiritual journey and we're healing our past and we're getting clear on our addictions, that's week 5. When we're doing this work, we become more available to love, so love can move through us and more available to others. And we're called into a deeper walk of love. Humility is not the same thing as humiliation. Some of us got a wrong idea that to be humble is to be less than. That's not what it means at all. To be humble is to be right-sized. So when we walk humbly with God, we're just going to be who we are in God. And who are we? We do a lot of teaching in unity. Sometimes in other churches, you might be told that we're dust and worms, We are the dust of the earth. We are as worms in the hands of an angry God. We don't dwell on that kind of teaching at unity because we don't believe it. We believe you are actually the greatness of God revealed in individual form. And so normally I don't spend a lot of time up here talking to you about how we need to be humble because I believe you're fantastic. I believe it is those old beliefs that you're not good enough that's what's keeping you from being all that God created you to be. I want you to be great. And we get this idea, how can I be humble and great at the same time? To be humble is the only way to be great. If you know who you are, you know that you are no better than anyone else ever, because you'll be seeing from the eyes of greatness that every person you meet is a child of a loving God. Even her. And that's where humility comes in. Because you see, you have made yourself, when you are in unforgiveness, you have made yourself judge and jury and executioner over another soul who is a perfect expression of a perfect God. Am I preaching a little too close to the bone now? Even him. I love these little laughters of recognition because people are coming to mind for you. Yeah. To walk humbly with your God means to be in right relationship, in right expression, in right action, in right relationship with others. And when we're in unforgiveness, we can't do that because we are seeing that they're wrong. They wronged me, and I have locked myself into victim consciousness. And you will never, ever be able to fully embody the vision that God has for your life if you're sitting in unforgiveness. Sometimes I just wish, just once, that the way that I would be able to step into the vision of my life and into the right relationship with God was to see my revenge fantasy fully acted out. Just once. Just once, if I could just see him get what he deserves. I don't think it's ever going to happen. When we're in unforgiveness, and truly, I do not want to dismiss the pain. I do not want to say that it didn't happen, because it did, and it was wrong. And you have suffered because of what they did to you. It just is what happened. But if you're going to hold that pain as your identity, and you're going to, in your own way, think that you're keeping them from the kingdom of God because you know who they really are. I was taught in the 12 steps that holding unforgiveness or resentment is like drinking poison, hoping the other person dies. I had someone after the first service, she said, I don't know, Michael, I thought I was doing pretty good until you preached that sermon. Now I know I got work to do. I don't think she was very appreciative. And why is this so? What is the theological underpinning and the grounding for this truth that we have to forgive others and be forgiven so that we can step into who we truly are? Jesus, again, in the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 7, verse 1 through 5, or 1 and 2 will be enough for today. Do not judge lest you too be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured unto you. Well, Jesus, this ancient teacher of wisdom, this way shower, this light bringer on earth, 2,000 years before Carl Jung talked about projection and shadow, he's describing this thing that happens, that if I'm holding you as wrong, I am holding myself as wrong. I have locked myself into like a bear hug with wrongness, with separation. Unity is absolutely a Christian lineage. We seek to be followers of Jesus, but there is a really clear way in which we are unlike most traditional churches, and that we do not believe that God could ever or would ever separate himself from us. That we are one with the Spirit always. And when we are in unforgiveness and resentment, we've told ourselves that we're separate and they're separate. And so the way back into walking humbly with God is to forgive and recognize that there is only one of us. There is only one of us. I talked about atonement. It's getting right. Making up for what is. I'm going to give you a different pronunciation of the word. I was given this 20 years ago in a Unity church, and I like it. Instead of saying atonement, we might think of it as at-one-ment. What we are to do is to come back into oneness. In the Lord's Prayer, Jesus taught us to pray, saying, forgive us our trespasses. We sang it earlier. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. In Unity, we teach that God does not need to forgive us, that we have never and could never separate ourselves from God except in our thought. The forgiveness of others opens us to a memory and an experience of being at one with all that is, and then we are in right relationship, walking humbly with our God again. It's not a two-step process, forgiving and forgiving. It's letting go of a wrong idea, and then we're right. And it takes time. Yeah, so how do we do it? I've given you the why you should. Sometimes I am here to comfort the afflicted, and sometimes I'm here to afflict the comfortable. There's no doubt about it. And I've told you why you need to forgive. I'm wagging my finger even a little bit. Make note. How do we do it? Well, it's a mystery, but it's a practice. But the idea is when you have that thought of him and what he did, them and what they did, instead of launching yourself back into the story and feeling that pain and bringing it up and holding them as wrong and holding yourself as victim, and you get into that story again with all of the energy around that, you come up with another way to approach that thought. The ancient Hawaiians had a practice called ho'oponopono. This is a practice that I encourage you to consider when a thought of unforgiveness comes to you. There are 4 lines to this prayer. When you have a thought of unforgiveness, you simply say this: I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. Thank you. Why would we say we're sorry when someone has done a horrible thing to us? How many of us are there? There's one. If there is unforgiveness, even though we may not be the perpetrator or the doer of the act, if we are holding judgment, resentment, unforgiveness, we are participating. We are active participants in separation. And so we must ask forgiveness. I am sorry that I have been holding you as anything less than a child of God. Please forgive me for my part in this damage and in this pain that we're experiencing. I love you. Thank you. It changes things. Pretty soon you'll notice that you have let go. That person is free to walk through the neighborhood of your mind without attack. Most of the time. I promised you a joke, 3 points, and a poem. Here comes the poem. Before the poem. I don't mean to bring up old pain so that you're feeling pain. What I'm hoping to do is point you to a door out of the pain. Because you're bigger than that. You are more than you know yourself to be. There is a huge, wonderful life waiting for you. But you must let go. This is by Reverend Sapphire Rose from the Agape community in Los Angeles. It's called She Let Go. She let go without a thought or a word. She let go. She let go of the fear of the judgments. She let go of the confluence of opinions swarming around her head. She let go of the committee of indecision within her. She let go of all the right reasons, wholly and completely, without hesitation or worry. She just let go. And she didn't ask for advice, and she didn't read a book on how to let go. She didn't search the scriptures. She just let go. She'd let go of all the memories that held her back. She let go of all the anxiety that kept her from moving forward. She let go of the planning and the calculations of how to do it just right. And she didn't promise to let go. She didn't journal about it. She didn't write about the projected date in her day timer. She made no public announcement and put no ad in any paper. She didn't check the weather report or her daily horoscope. She just let go. She didn't analyze whether she should let go. She didn't call her friends to discuss the matter. She didn't do a 5-step spiritual mind treatment. She didn't call the prayer line. She didn't utter one word. She just let go. And no one was around when it happened. There was no applause or congratulations. No one thanked her or praised her. No one noticed a thing. Like a leaf falling from a tree, she just let go. There was no effort. There was no struggle. It wasn't good and it wasn't bad. It was what it was. And it is just that. And in the space of letting go, she let it all be. And a small smile came over her face. A light breeze blew through her. And the sun and the moon rose forevermore. God bless you.
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.